Abigail Mercer pressed both palms flat against the back of the church pew and told herself she would not cry. Not here. Not in front of them. The summer air hung thick and still inside that chapel, and every eye in the building was fixed on her like she was something already broken, already finished. Her stepmother sat in the front row, wearing a smile that had nothing kind behind it. Her father stared at the floor, and at the end of that aisle stood a stranger with a cane, a man no one in this county would have chosen, and they had chosen him for her. If you've ever been handed to someone like a problem to be solved, drop your city in the comments below and subscribe because this story is for you. The preacher's voice was the only sound in the chapel. Abigail Mercer walked that aisle the way a woman walks to a sentence. Slow, back straight, eyes forward. She had learned a long time ago that when people are waiting for you to fall apart, you do not give them the satisfaction. So she walked, and she did not look at her stepmother, and she did not look at her father, and she did not look at the faces of the neighbors who had come to witness what Margaret Bell Mercer had arranged, which was the quietest kind of disposal, the kind dressed up in ceremony and called a blessing. The man at the altar turned when she reached him. She had been told his name was Nathaniel Cross. She had been told he was a veteran of the late war returned from the frontier with a broken leg that never healed right and a debt that ate everything he once owned. She had been told he was the only man in 3 counties willing to take a girl with no dowry, no connections, and a family that wanted her gone. She had been told a great deal. She was beginning to understand that very little of it was true. He was taller than she expected, lean in the way men go, lean when they've spent years moving hard and eating little. The cane he carried was plain, no silver, no carving, and he held it the way a man holds something he's chosen, not something he needs. His coat was worn at the collar, his jaw was set. He did not smile at her, and she was grateful for that because she could not have tolerated a false smile on top of everything else. He looked at her the way you look at a situation you are calculating. Abigail looked back at him, the way she looked at everything she did not yet understand carefully, and from behind a face that showed nothing. The preacher cleared his throat. "We are gathered this morning." "I know why we are gathered," Abigail said under her breath to no one. Nathaniel Cross heard her. She saw his jaw move. She thought it might have been something close to agreement. Margaret Bell sat in the first pew with her hands folded over her Bible and her 2 daughters arranged beside her like a painting of Christian virtue. She had selected this dress for Abigail clean enough to be respectable, plain enough to be a reminder. When Abigail had put it on that morning in the small back room of the Mercer house, Margaret had stood in the doorway and said with that smooth, satisfied voice, "There, that'll do fine for what this is." Abigail had not answered. She had already learned that answering Margaret was like feeding a fire. The fire grew. "You didn't." The preacher moved through the words. Abigail heard them at a distance the way you hear rain from inside a house present, but not touching you. Her father had not looked up from the floor since she entered. Judge Silas Mercer, who had presided over land disputes and debt hearings and the formal ruination of more than a few of his neighbors, could not bring himself to look at his own daughter on her wedding morning. She noted that. She filed it away in the same place she filed everything that hurt deep, where it became something colder and more useful than pain. She was thinking about her mother's papers. 3 months ago, going through the cedar chest that Margaret had moved twice and nearly thrown out entirely, Abigail had found a leather packet of documents, letters, numbers, a property record with her mother's name on it, and a date that did not match anything Margaret had told her about the family's finances. She had not finished reading before Margaret appeared in the doorway, and she had not been fast enough to hide what she was doing. That had been the beginning of the end. Within a week, Nathaniel Cross had appeared in their county. Within 3 weeks, the marriage had been arranged. Abigail was not foolish enough to believe that was a coincidence. "Do you take this man," the preacher was saying, "to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Abigail looked at Nathaniel Cross. She had decided walking up that aisle that she would say no. She had built the word in her mouth like a stone. She had planned exactly how she would stand and what expression she would wear, and how she would walk out of that chapel and go somewhere. Anywhere. The word had felt like the only power left to her in a situation that had taken every other power away. And then she looked at his hands. His left hand rested on the head of his cane. His right hung at his side. Both were still, completely still. Not the stillness of a man who was nervous and hiding it. Not the stillness of a man pretending to be relaxed. The stillness of a man who had decided already what was going to happen and was simply waiting for the world to catch up. Those were not a beggar's hands. Abigail had grown up watching her father's hands, soft, restless, reaching for reassurance in every direction. She had watched Elias Rook's hands at the county meeting last fall, thick, proprietary touching things that didn't belong to him. She had watched men's hands her whole life, the way you watch weather. You learned what was coming by paying attention. Nathaniel Cross's hands were soldiers' hands, controlled and deliberate. The hands of a man who had decided what he was doing and why. She said yes. The word came out of her before she'd fully chosen it, and once it was in the air, she did not take it back. She felt Margaret shift in the pew behind her, a small, satisfied movement, like a woman crossing an item off a list. Abigail heard it. She stored it. She would think about it later. Nathaniel Cross said yes as well, in a voice that was low and even, and told her nothing at all. The preacher pronounced them married. There was polite, hollow applause from the pews. Margaret's daughters smiled at each other. Judge Mercer finally looked up from the floor, met Abigail's eyes for exactly 1 second, and looked away again. She saw guilt in him, the specific shameful guilt of a man who knows what he has done and has decided that being forgiven is someone else's job. She filed that away too. Outside the chapel, the heat hit her like a wall. August in Virginia was not the gentle season the poets made of it. It was weight and stillness, and the smell of red clay and horse sweat, and the sky above the road was the hard white blue of midday, with the sun sitting in it like a judgment. Abigail stood on the chapel steps and waited for whatever came next. She expected a wagon. She expected a long, silent drive to somewhere modest. She expected to spend the first evening of her married life in a small house that smelled of old cooking and loneliness. 3 men in plain coats were waiting at the end of the lane. Behind them stood a carriage, not a wagon. A carriage with matched horses and a driver who sat with the particular patience of a man who had been paid well and expected to wait. Abigail stared at it. "That's ours," Nathaniel Cross said at her shoulder in that same low, even voice. She turned to look at him. "You are going to explain that to me?" "Yes. Now." "When we are moving." He looked past her at the chapel door where several guests had followed them out, and his expression did not change, but something in his posture did. He was watching the crowd, the way you watch a room you are not certain is safe. "Please, Mrs. Cross, walk to the carriage." She wanted to argue. She wanted to stand on those steps and demand an account of everything right there in front of her stepmother and her father, and the assembled witnesses to what was supposed to be her humiliation. But she was 20 years old and had not survived her stepmother's household by being impulsive. She thought fast. She calculated. And what she calculated was that the carriage told her more than anything else that had happened this morning, and that understanding what it meant was worth the cost of patience. She walked to the carriage. The 3 men in plain coats arranged themselves around them with practiced efficiency, one to the front, one to the back, one beside the driver, and the whole assembly moved off the lane before anyone from the chapel had reached the road. Inside the carriage, with the curtains half drawn and the summer dust rising around them, Abigail folded her hands in her lap and said, "Start at the beginning." Nathaniel Cross sat across from her. He had set the cane against the wall. His hands, she noticed, were perfectly still again. He looked at her for a moment with something that was not quite respect, but was adjacent to it, the look of a man reassessing a situation. "Your family did not sell you to a poor man," he said. "They sold you to a problem they do not understand. That is not the beginning. That is a riddle. It is the truth. Then tell me the rest of the truth." She kept her voice level. She was very good at keeping her voice level. "Who are you?" He was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of a man avoiding a question, the silence of a man choosing which door to open first. "My name is Nathaniel Whitaker," he said. The name meant something. She had heard it before in the years before her mother died, in conversations that stopped when she entered the room, in the particular way adults go quiet around a child when they are discussing something important. Whitaker. Shipping. Land. A family that had holdings from the coast to the Piedmont before the war scattered them. "The Whitaker family," she said. "What remains of it?" "They said you were ruined." "They were meant to believe that." She looked at him steadily. "Why?" "Because a ruined man can move through a county without attracting the kind of attention that stops investigations." The word landed between them in the heat of the carriage, like a stone dropped in still water. Investigations. "What are you investigating?" she said. "Land fraud, debt seizure, forged court documents. A man named Elias Rook who has been using the law as a weapon against families who have no recourse against it." He paused. "And the network of county officials who are paid to make certain no recourse ever appears." Abigail was quiet for a moment. Outside the carriage, she could hear the horses and the summer insects and nothing else. "My stepmother," she said, "and my father." He didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. "They are involved with Rook," she said. "Your father has signed documents he should not have signed. Your stepmother has known what those documents meant." He watched her face. "I am sorry." She almost laughed at that, not because it was funny, but because sorry was such an insufficient word for what he was describing. Sorry. Her mother had been dead for 4 years. The papers in the cedar chest, the property record, the letters, the numbers that did not add up, had been sitting in her mother's name the whole time, and her father had been sitting at Elias Rook's table the whole time, and sorry was the word this man offered her for it. "Don't apologize to me," she said. "Tell me what you need." He looked at her again with that reassessing expression. "I beg your pardon. You arranged this marriage for a reason. I am not a fool, and I would prefer you stop behaving as though I am. You needed a reason to be in this county without drawing notice. You needed a respectable household as cover. And you chose a woman whose family is connected to the man you are investigating, which means you believed she might be useful." She held his gaze. "So tell me what you need." A long pause. "You are not what I expected," Nathaniel Whitaker said. "No one ever is, once they stop being what other people decided they were." She smoothed the skirt of the borrowed dress. "What do you need?" He looked at her for another moment, measuring, calculating, and then something shifted in him. Not warmth. Not yet. Something more like decision. "There are documents hidden in your mother's name," he said. "Property records. Original deeds. If they exist, and if they are where I believe they are the foundation of the entire case against Rook. Without them, everything I have is circumstantial. With them—" He stopped. "With them, you can take him down." "Yes. And my mother found them first." He looked at her. "I believe so." Abigail sat with that for a moment. The carriage moved through the summer heat, and the road turned away from town, and the sound of the insects was constant and indifferent. The way nature is indifferent to the things people do to each other. Her mother had found proof. Her mother had died. Her stepmother had moved the cedar chest twice and nearly thrown it out. And her father had signed whatever Elias Rook put in front of him. "She knew," Abigail said. "Not a question." "I believe she did. And they knew she knew." Nathaniel Whitaker said nothing. But his hands, she noticed, had tightened slightly, just slightly, on the head of his cane. Abigail looked at him with the flat, clear look she had been developing since she was 16 years old, and first understood that the world would not protect her, and so she would have to protect herself. "Where are we going?" she said. "A property near the James River. It's held in a name Rook does not yet know is connected to me. And the documents, the originals. Where are they?" "The county courthouse, if they have not been moved or destroyed." He paused. "Or both." "Then we need to move quickly." "Yes." and I want access to everything you have." She said it plainly, the way you say something you expect to have to fight for. "All the records, all the evidence, everything you have gathered." He looked at her with something that was still not quite respect, still that adjacent thing, the reassessing look, and said, "You haven't asked me yet whether this is dangerous." "I know it's dangerous," Abigail said. "I grew up in that house. I know exactly how dangerous these people are when they decide someone knows too much." She met his eyes. "My mother knew too much." Nathaniel Whitaker was quiet for a long moment. The carriage moved. The summer pressed down on the roof above them. Somewhere outside, a hawk called once and went silent. "You will have access to everything," he said finally. She nodded once. She did not thank him. Gratitude could wait until she had decided whether any of this was worth being grateful for. She looked out the gap in the curtain at the road moving past red clay and summer scrub, and the long flat heat of a Virginia August, and she thought about the cedar chest and the documents with her mother's name on them, and the marriage she had just walked into with a man who was not what he appeared, and a situation that was considerably more dangerous than a simple forced wedding. She thought about the look on her stepmother's face when she'd caught Abigail with those papers, the particular alarm of it, the way Margaret had moved faster than she usually moved across that room. Not the alarm of a woman who had been caught in something wrong. The alarm of a woman who was afraid of what Abigail had already read. Abigail's hands were folded in her lap. They were steady. She was 20 years old and had nothing left to lose, which was the most useful condition in the world for what came next. The carriage moved on through the heat, and Nathaniel Whitaker sat across from her and watched her with those careful, calculating eyes, and neither of them spoke for a long while, and that silence was not the silence of two strangers who had nothing to say to each other. It was the silence of two people who had already begun to plan. The estate did not look like power. That was the first thing Abigail understood when the carriage turned off the main road, and she felt the change in ground beneath them, smoother, more deliberate, the kind of road built by someone who did not want it noticed on a county map. The house itself she could hear before she could see it clearly through the curtain gap, the sound of movement of people who knew what they were doing and had been doing it a long time. Not a household of servants performing comfort. A household operating like a quiet machine. Nathaniel stepped down first and offered his hand. She took it because refusing it in front of watching eyes would have been its own kind of information, and she was not ready to give information away. A woman was waiting at the top of the steps. She was perhaps 60, and she wore that age the way certain women wear it, not as a concession, but as an authority earned through surviving things that would have finished lesser people. Her hair was silver white and pinned without apology. Her eyes were dark and quick, and moved over Abigail the way an assessor moves over a piece of land, estimating value, cataloging risk, reaching conclusions before the introduction was even made. "So this is her," the woman said. "Clara," Nathaniel said. "This is Abigail, my wife." "I can see that." Clara Whitaker descended 2 steps without taking her eyes off Abigail. "You're taller than I expected. And you're not crying. That's better than the last one." "The last what?" Abigail said. The last woman Nathaniel brought into this situation without adequate warning. Clara stopped in front of her and looked at her the way you look at something you are genuinely trying to understand. She fainted. "You won't faint. I can tell." "No," Abigail agreed. "I won't." "Good." Clara turned back toward the house. "Come inside, both of you. We've lost enough of the afternoon." Abigail followed and said nothing because she was busy processing the fact that this woman had apparently been expecting her, had apparently been part of the plan from the beginning, and had just communicated more useful information in 4 sentences than Nathaniel had managed in an hour's carriage ride. She filed that away too. The room Clara brought them to was not a parlor, and it was not a library, though it had elements of both. What it was, Abigail understood immediately, was a working room. Long tables, papers, ledgers stacked in ordered groups. A corkboard on the far wall with documents pinned to it and threads connecting them in colors she suspected were not random. The smell of ink and paper and long, concentrated effort. She stopped inside the doorway. "How long," she said, "has this been going on?" Nathaniel set his cane against the table. 2 years. 2 years. She looked at the corkboard. The threads ran in half a dozen directions. Names she recognized. Names she didn't. Dates going back further than she'd expected. And in 2 years you haven't been able to build a case. We've built a case, Clara said from behind her. What we have not been able to build is one that a compromised court cannot simply dissolve. Because the judges are bought. Most of them, not all. Clara moved to the table and tapped a ledger with 2 fingers. The problem is not evidence. We have evidence. The problem is authentication. Rook's lawyers will challenge every document we produce, the chain of custody, the witnesses, the original signatories. We need something that predates his reach, something he cannot argue was manufactured after the fact. Abigail looked at the corkboard and felt something move in her chest. Not quite excitement, not quite dread. Something between the two. She had grown up in a house where information was kept from her because keeping her ignorant made her easier to manage. She had spent 4 years teaching herself things, reading law books her father left on his desk, copying down land survey notations from county records when she was allowed into town, memorizing the things that adults said to each other when they thought she was not paying attention. She had not known what she was preparing for. She was beginning to understand. "Let me see the ledgers," she said. Nathaniel looked at her. "I told you on the carriage you'd have access. Then give me access. Now. Today." She looked at him steadily. "I am not going to sit in a room somewhere and wait to be told what's happening. That is not an arrangement I will accept." A pause. Something moved behind his eyes, calculation, and then something more reluctant, something that looked like recognition. "Clara," he said. "She's right," Clara said. "Let her look." He pulled a chair from the table and set it in front of the nearest stack of ledgers, without another word. Abigail sat down, smoothed her skirt, and began to read. For the next 2 hours the room was nearly silent. Nathaniel worked at the far table. Clara moved between the corkboard and a second set of papers near the window. Abigail read. She read with the specific hungry attention of someone who had been kept from information and has now been given a door and intends to go through every room behind it. The ledgers were land transaction records, debt agreements, court filings, the kind of paperwork that was designed to look routine. Nothing in any single document was obviously criminal. It was only when you laid them against each other, only when you tracked the same parcels across years and compared the signatories and the dates and the recorded values that the pattern emerged. She saw it in the third ledger. "Stop," she said. Both Nathaniel and Clara looked up. "This parcel." She pressed her finger to the page. Lot 14, Harmon County. It changed hands in 1813. But the debt filing that triggered the transfer is dated 4 months after the transfer was already recorded. Nathaniel came around the table. He looked at the entry. He was quiet for a moment. "That would mean that the debt was recorded after the fact, backdated." She turned to the next ledger and found the companion record. And here the same parcel in 1815. A second transfer. This one with a new deed of survey. But the survey is signed by a county officer who died in 1812. The silence in the room changed quality. "A dead man signed a 1815 document," Clara said. "Yes." Abigail looked up at them both. "That's forgery. That's not a technicality a lawyer can argue away. That is forgery." She paused. "How many other parcels have this kind of discrepancy?" Nathaniel sat down across from her. He put his elbows on the table and looked at the ledger with the expression of a man who has been staring at something for 2 years without seeing what was directly in front of it. "I don't know," he said. "Then we need to find out." She turned the page. "I'm going to need the full registry from 1811 forward." He looked at her for a long moment, that same reassessing expression, like a map he thought he had memorized that had just revealed a road he hadn't known existed. "Third stack," he said. "Left side." She reached for it. Clara said from across the room with a voice that was completely neutral, Your mother had that same way of reading, straight to the number that didn't fit. Abigail's hands stopped on the ledger. She looked at Clara Whitaker. You knew her, she said. Clara did not look away. We corresponded, beginning in 1814 when she first noticed irregularities in your father's court signatures. She wrote to me because she had heard my name in connection with the Whitaker family, and she knew the Whitaker family had been looking into Rook's dealings before the war scattered us. She paused. She was careful. She was very careful. She did not put names in letters. She used numbers for people, places, amounts. She had a system. Abigail put the ledger down. How long? She said. Her voice was steady. She worked to keep it that way. How long did she correspond with you? 8 months. And then she stopped. Clara was quiet. She died in January 1816, Abigail said. Yes. And the letters she sent you, do you still have them? Every one. The weight of that settled on Abigail, like the summer heat present everywhere pressing on everything. Her mother had known. Her mother had been gathering evidence for 8 months corresponding with a woman she'd never met building toward something. And then she had died. And Margaret had moved the cedar chest twice, and her father had looked at the floor on her wedding morning, and Elias Rook had continued to build his private empire on forged paper and dead men's signatures. She picked the ledger back up. I want to read those letters, she said. Tonight. I thought you might, Clara said. They're in your room. Nathaniel said nothing. He was watching Abigail with an expression she did not have a name for, yet something between wariness and something else that she chose for the moment to leave unexamined. She turned the page and kept reading. By the time the summer light had gone from the windows, Abigail had identified 11 parcels with the same pattern of backdated debt filings and post-dated forgeries. 11 families. She wrote each one down in a small notebook she'd found on the table and documented the discrepancies with the same flat precision she'd been developing for years in her stepmother's house, where keeping exact records of the things people said and did was the only form of protection available to her. When she set the pen down, Nathaniel slid a plate across the table toward her without comment. She looked at it and realized she had not eaten since that morning. Thank you, she said. You found 11? He said. At least 11. There may be more in the earlier records. I'll need to go back to 1810. She picked up the fork. The pattern started somewhere. There's always a first transaction, the one where he tested the system and found out it would hold. If we find that first one, we trace the whole network forward from it. Every parcel, every debt filing, every forged signature. She paused. And we find which court officer first approved a backdated document. Because that person is either still complicit or they are terrified, and either way, they are a thread we can pull. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. You've done this before. This kind of analysis. No, she said. I've survived this kind of household. It's not the same skill, but it's adjacent. He looked at her. She ate and did not look back. Clara appeared in the doorway. We have a problem. Both of them looked up. A writer came in from town while you were working. She held a piece of folded paper. Elias Rook has invited the new couple, specifically Mr. and Mrs. Cross, to dinner at the Haverfield plantation on Friday evening. He extends his warmest congratulations. The word warmest came out of Clara's mouth the way you handle something you suspect is diseased. He will expect a reply before tomorrow noon. The room went very still. Abigail set her fork down. He already knows we're here, she said. He has people in every county, Nathaniel said. He would have known within hours of the wedding. Then he knows who I am. He knows I'm a Mercer. She looked at the invitation in Clara's hand. He's testing us. He wants to see if we'll come if we're confident enough to walk into his house, or if we'll make excuses. If we decline, he reads it as weakness or suspicion, Clara said. If we accept, we are in his house on his ground, surrounded by his allies. Nathaniel's voice was flat and careful. And if he has any reason to believe I am not who I am claiming to be, then we don't give him a reason. Abigail looked across the table at Nathaniel. We go. Abigail. "We go," she said again, with the same level certainty she'd used all day. The certainty that came not from confidence in the outcome, but from having already thought through the alternatives and found them worse. We go, and we smile, and we behave exactly like what we are supposed to be: a man with modest means who married above his reputation, and a woman who was discarded by her family, and is grateful to be anywhere at all. She paused. "Can you play that?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Can you?" he said. "I've been playing some version of it my whole life." She picked her fork back up. "Send the reply. We accept." Clara looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel looked at Abigail. Something passed between the two older ones. A glance quick and communicative, the shorthand of people who have worked together long enough to speak without words. Then Clara nodded once and left the room. Nathaniel said, "If anything goes wrong Friday night, then we handle it." She met his eyes. "But nothing is going to go wrong, because I am not going to let it." He was quiet. And then very quietly he said, "You are going to be difficult to manage." "Then stop trying to manage me," she said, "and try working with me instead." That was the last thing either of them said that evening. Friday arrived with the particular cruelty of summer heat at its worst. The air thick and close, the kind of day that made everyone slightly more irritable and slightly less careful. Abigail spent the morning with her mother's letters. Clara had said they were careful letters, and they were. Each one numbered and dated. Each person referred to by an initial or a number. Each property by its county registry lot number. But Abigail had grown up with her mother's handwriting. She had read her mother's journals and her household accounts, and the small notes her mother left pressed inside books she wanted Abigail to find. She knew the way her mother thought. She knew the shape of her mother's reasoning. And what her mother's reasoning led to in 8 months of careful coded correspondence was this: Elias Rook was not simply stealing land. He was building towards something specific. A consolidation of river access property along the James that would, when complete, give him control of the primary trade route between the interior counties and the coast. Every farm he seized, every debt he manufactured, every widow he evicted, it was not random opportunism. It was a map, a plan. He was building an empire, one forged document at a time, and when it was finished, no goods would move through that region without his permission and his fee. Abigail brought the letters to Nathaniel at noon. He read them standing up, which she had noticed was how he read things he considered important. He read them twice. When he set the last one down, he looked at her with an expression she had not seen from him before. Something had shifted behind his eyes, not the reassessing look, not the calculating look, something more direct, more honest. "She laid out the whole pattern," he said, "in 1815, a year before she died. We have been looking at this the wrong way. We've been treating each parcel as a separate crime. She understood it was one connected crime with one connected intent." He looked at the letters again. "If we can prove that intent, then the whole structure falls at once, not parcel by parcel, all of it." Abigail straightened. "And Rook cannot argue that any individual transaction was a mistake or an error in paperwork. A pattern of intent is different from a collection of incidents." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "How do we prove intent?" "We find the first transaction, the one that started the river access plan, and we find who advised him to pursue it, because a plan this organized did not come from Rook alone. He has a legal mind working for him, someone who understood land law and trade rights well enough to design the whole thing." She watched his face. "You already suspect someone," she said. He was quiet for just a moment too long. "Tell me," she said. "There is a county attorney in Harmon County, a man named Gerald Fitch. He has handled the paperwork on 12 of the 14 parcels I've identified." He paused. "He is also the man who signed the death certificate for a witness who was prepared to testify about one of the early debt filings. The witness died 3 days before he was scheduled to speak." The room was very quiet. "You think Fitch is more than a facilitator," Abigail said. "I think Fitch may be the architect, And Rook is the money. Then Friday night, she said slowly, we need to see whether Fitch is at that dinner table. He looked at her. And if he is, then we know we're close enough to make Rook nervous, and nervous men make mistakes. She picked up her mother's letters and stacked them with the same careful precision her mother had used to write them. And we are going to be there to see every one of them. The Haverfield plantation, in the full heat of a Friday August evening, was everything Elias Rook had designed it to be, the architecture of a man who wanted you to understand from the moment you arrived that you were on his ground and at his sufferance. Abigail understood all of that. She did not show that she understood, which was the only useful thing to do with it. Rook met them in the front hall with the smooth, practiced warmth of a man who had been charming people into trusting him for 30 years. He was perhaps 55, heavy in the shoulders, with the particular health of someone who has never genuinely worried about money. His handshake for Nathaniel was confident. His greeting for Abigail was the specific kind of gracious that contained, if you knew how to read it, a complete dismissal. "Mrs. Cross," he said with a smile that went nowhere near his eyes. "What a pleasure. You look very well considering." Considering, a word chosen with care. "Mr. Rook," she said with a smile of her own that was equally traveled and equally empty. "What a beautiful home." Gerald Fitch was at the dinner table, third seat on the right. Abigail registered that information without moving her eyes in his direction more than once. There were 8 guests in total. A local magistrate. 2 men whose clothing and manner identified them as merchants with considerable interests. A minister who laughed too readily at whatever Rook said. And a woman named Mrs. Aldridge who sat beside Fitch, and whose ring, Abigail noticed, bore the initials of a family whose land appeared in the ledgers in connection with a debt filing from 1813. The dinner moved through its courses with the particular performance of wealthy hospitality. The food was excellent, the conversation was careful, and under every word was the invisible structure of who owed whom what and who knew what about whom. Abigail had grown up at dinner tables like this. She knew how to be present without being seen, which was different from being invisible. Invisible people were noticed by their absence. She was noticed by her presence. A young woman, a Mercer girl properly subdued, and that was exactly where she needed to be. Rook waited until the third course to come for her. He did it pleasantly, which was how he did everything. A turn of conversation, a light observation, a question posed with apparent innocence. "Mrs. Cross," he said, "I understand your family has had some financial difficulties in recent years. It must be a relief to be settled." He let the word carry just enough weight. "Fortunate for a girl in your position." The table listened. Wives of powerful men always know when a man is moving in for something, and the 2 women at the table went very slightly still. Nathaniel beside her did not move, but she felt him the particular stillness she had learned to recognize, the stillness of a man preparing to intervene. She spoke before he could. "No, sir," Abigail said. Her voice was pleasant. Her smile was the same. "I was not fortunate." Rook blinked, just slightly. "I beg your pardon. You said it must be a relief to be fortunate. I'm correcting the word." She picked up her water glass with absolute composure. "I was not rescued, and I was not fortunate. I was underestimated." She looked at him over the rim of the glass with the clear, flat look she had been developing since she was 16 years old. There is a significant difference. The table was very quiet. Rook looked at her. She looked back at him, and she let him look, and she did not lower her eyes, because she had learned a long time ago that the first person to look away in a moment like this had already told the other person everything they needed to know. Rook smiled. It was the smile of a man who has just been surprised and does not intend to let it show. "Indeed," he said. "Indeed there is." He turned the conversation. Smoothly, professionally. But Abigail caught Gerald Fitch looking at her from across the table with an expression that was not the magistrate's comfortable amusement or the minister's empty cheer. It was the expression of a man who was calculating, re-evaluating. The expression of a man who had been told something was simple and has just discovered it might not be. She filed that expression away with the same care she filed everything. The dinner ended. The carriages were called. Rook saw them out with the same practiced warmth he'd deployed at the beginning, and when he shook Nathaniel's hand a second time, he held it a moment longer than he needed to. "It is good to have you in our county, Mr. Cross," he said. "I hope you intend to stay." "We intend to stay," Nathaniel said. "Excellent." Rook released his hand. He looked just once at Abigail. Something in his expression had changed, an adjustment, subtle, and controlled the recalibration of a man who had come into the evening with one estimate and was leaving with a different one. "Excellent." In the carriage on the return, with the summer dark heavy around them and the sound of the horses on the road, the only sound, Nathaniel said, "Fitch watched you all evening." "I know." "After what you said to Rook." "Good." She looked at him. "Let them watch. Let them wonder what I know and how I know it and what I intend to do with it." She paused. "Nervous men make mistakes. You said that." "You said that." "Then it must be true." He was quiet for a moment. She could see him in the low light from the carriage lamp, the steady hands, the set jaw, the expression of a man turning things over in his mind with the same careful precision she brought to ledgers. "You handled Rook well," he said. "I handled him exactly as well as I had to." She looked out the curtain gap at the summer dark moving past them. "He came in expecting a frightened girl. He left uncertain." She paused. "That uncertainty is the most useful thing we made tonight." A long pause. "Clara is going to like you," Nathaniel said. "Clara already likes me," Abigail said. "She decided that before I said a word. She likes that I didn't faint." A sound from him that was not quite a laugh, but was the closest thing to it she'd heard. They rode in silence for a while. Abigail was thinking about Gerald Fitch's expression, about the look that had crossed his face when she'd answered Rook, about the way he had tracked her movements for the rest of the evening with that careful, recalculating attention. She was also thinking about the corkboard in the working room, about the threads running between names and dates and parcels of land, about 11 families she had identified in a single afternoon of reading. She was thinking about her mother sitting somewhere in this same county 8 years ago, writing careful numbered letters to a woman she'd never met, building a case with the same patient precision. Her mother had gotten close enough that someone had decided she was a problem. Abigail intended to get closer. When the carriage stopped and they stepped down into the warm August night, Clara was waiting just inside the door with a face that told them immediately that something was wrong. "The working room," Clara said. "Someone was in it." Nathaniel moved first. Abigail followed. The door to the working room was exactly as they'd left it, closed, locked. But Clara had been inside while they were gone, and the corkboard had been touched. Not obviously, not carelessly. Someone who knew what they were doing had gone through the documents on the rightmost table and replaced them in almost the right order. Almost. 3 ledgers, Abigail said, looking at the table. They moved those 3 and put them back in the wrong sequence. She looked at Nathaniel. They were looking for something specific. "Or verifying that we have it," Clara said. The room was quiet. Outside the window, the summer night pressed close and dark and indifferent to all of them. "They know," Nathaniel said, not with surprise, with a kind of grim acknowledgement. "Whatever cover we had, it's gone." Abigail looked at the corkboard, at the threads, at the 11 names she had written in her notebook that afternoon, at the shape of a plan that her mother had died for understanding too early. "Then we move faster," she said. They did not sleep that night. Clara put the 3 disturbed ledgers back in their correct sequence and then stood at the corkboard for a long time without speaking. Nathaniel moved between the table and the window. Abigail sat with her mother's letters spread before her and read them again, not for the content this time, but for the map her mother had been building without ever calling it that. Her mother had been careful. She had been so careful that Abigail had read the letters twice before and still missed it. She saw it on the 3rd pass. "Lot 7, she said. Both Nathaniel and Clara looked at her. My mother's letter from November 1815. She references Lot 7 Harmon County, and she uses a phrase she doesn't use anywhere else in the correspondence. Abigail held the letter up. She writes in her numbering system translated that the original is held at the place where the county keeps its permanent record. Not a copy. The original. She looked at them. She found the original deed, the one that proves her inheritance, and she recorded where it was. The courthouse, Nathaniel said. The county land registry, permanent records vault. Abigail set the letter down with both hands flat on either side of it. My mother put that information in this letter in November 1815. She was dead by January 1816. The room absorbed that, Clara said very quietly. She knew they were coming for her. She knew something was wrong. She didn't know how wrong. Abigail looked at the corkboard. But she made sure the location survived even if she didn't. Nathaniel picked up his cane and crossed to the table. He stood beside her and looked at the letter. She could feel him thinking the same quality of stillness he brought to everything he considered important. If that deed is still in the vault, he said, it was filed before Rook's network was fully in place, before his people were managing which records survived and which ones disappeared. She looked up at him. It may be the only original document in this entire county that he hasn't been able to touch. Or it may be gone already. Then we find out. She met his eyes. Tonight. Abigail. Not tomorrow. Not through legal channels that Gerald Fitch has had 2 years to corrupt. She stood up from the chair and faced him directly. You said yourself that your cover is gone. That means every day we wait is a day they have to move those documents, destroy those records, or remove anyone who might testify. We go tonight, or we lose it. A long pause. Clara said from across the room, She's right. Nathaniel looked at Clara. Clara looked back at him with the particular expression of a woman who has made her position clear and does not intend to repeat it. There's something else, Clara said. She moved to the far side of the table and opened a drawer Abigail had not seen opened before. She removed a folded paper. A man came to this property 3 weeks ago, before the wedding, before any of this was arranged. His name is Thomas Webb. He is a clerk in the county records office. She set the paper on the table. He has been copying documents quietly for 8 months. He came to us because he saw what was happening to the families whose records he was handling, and he decided he could not continue to be part of it in silence. Abigail stared at this paper. You have a contact inside the courthouse. We have a frightened man who wants to do the right thing and is not certain how much longer he can do it quietly. Clara's voice was careful. He knows where the original land records are kept. The ones that have not been brought into the main filing room. The ones in the old stone vault at the back of the building. Nathaniel looked at the paper. You didn't tell me about Webb. I was waiting to see whether the situation warranted the risk. Clara looked at him steadily. The situation now warrants the risk. For a moment, the only sound was the summer night insects, a distant horse, the particular silence of a house where 3 people are calculating the same problem from different angles. Can Webb get us in? Abigail said. He can get 1 person in through the records entrance, Clara said. Quietly, without the night watchman knowing. 1 person. Abigail looked at Nathaniel. I'll go. No, I know what I'm looking for. I know my mother's filing system. I know the lot number, the date, the original signature. She kept her voice level, the way she always kept her voice when she needed to be heard rather than argued with. You are 6 inches taller than any clerk in that building. You walk with a cane, and you are the person Rook's men are looking for. I am a woman who was married 4 days ago and is not yet interesting enough to watch at midnight. She paused. I'll go. Nathaniel said nothing for 3 seconds. 4, 5. Clara goes with you to the road, he said. You do not go inside without Webb confirming it's clear. If anything at all feels wrong, you walk away. You do not attempt to retrieve the documents. You walk away, and we find another way. He looked at her with an expression that was not the calculating look and was not the reassessing look. It was something more direct than either and more difficult to read. "Do you understand me?" "I understand you," she said. "I don't necessarily agree with all of it, but I understand you." He made a sound that was not quite frustration and not quite something else. "That is not reassuring," he said. "It wasn't meant to be." She picked up her mother's letter and folded it with care. "Send word to Webb. Tell him tonight." Thomas Webb was 40 years old and looked 60. He had the particular appearance of a man who has been carrying a secret so long it had begun to alter his posture. Rounded shoulders, careful eyes, the slight hesitation before each sentence of a man who had learned to measure every word before releasing it. He met Abigail at the side entrance of the records building with the lantern turned so low it was more of a suggestion of light than light itself. He looked at her. He looked behind her. He looked at the road. "You're alone," he said. "My husband is nearby." A careful truth. "You're Thomas Webb." "Yes, ma'am." He glanced at the road again. "We need to move quickly. The night watchman makes his circuit at the half hour. We have until then." He brought her through the side entrance and down a passage that smelled of old paper and summer heat and the particular dense mustiness of documents that have been accumulating in a confined space for decades. She followed the dim lantern and did not speak, and paid attention to every turn. The vault was at the back of the building. The door was iron-banded oak and had a lock that Webb opened with a key. He kept separately from his others. She noticed him reach into a specific inside pocket, not the ring of office keys at his belt. "How long have you had that key?" she said. 7 months. He pushed the door open. "Copied it from the county recorder's ring. He doesn't know." He held the lantern up inside the vault. "The original filings are in the third rank, left side, organized by year and lot number. If your mother's deed was filed before 1812, it will be in the brown-bound registry, if after the green." She was already moving. She found the registry. She found the year. She turned pages with the same flat, precise attention she brought to everything. Not rushing, because rushing made errors, and she could not afford errors. She found her mother's name. The deed was there. Original ink, original seal, original signature of the county surveyor who had filed it in 1809, 7 years before her mother died. Years before Elias Rook had assembled his network, before Gerald Fitch had learned that a dead man's signature was a useful tool. It was there, untouched. Filed and forgotten in a vault that Rook had apparently not yet understood was important. "It's here," she said. Webb exhaled, a long relieved sound. "Thank God. I need to take it. Taking original documents from the vault is... I know what it is." She looked at him over the edge of the registry. "I also know that if I leave it here, and Rook's people search this building, which they will possibly as soon as tomorrow, it will disappear, and we will never see it again." She kept her voice even and her eyes on his. "Help me or don't, but I am not leaving this building without that deed." Webb looked at her. He was frightened, she could see it clearly, but he was frightened in the way a man is frightened when he has already made a decision and is simply waiting for his body to accept it. "Take it," he said. "Take the whole registry page if you must. Take what you need." She was already carefully removing the page. It was then that she smelled the smoke. Not immediately, not with the full alarm of fire already consuming something. The first signal was faint, a thread of something acrid moving through the thick paper smell of the vault, wrong, in the specific way that wrong smells are wrong. Your body knows before your mind has formed the thought. She looked at Webb. He had gone completely white. "That's not from the road," he said. She moved. She was back through the vault door and into the passage before Webb had finished the sentence, the registry page folded once and pressed flat inside her dress against her ribs, moving fast and low through the passage toward the way they had come in. The side entrance passage was already hazy. Not thick, not yet, but the kind of haze that precedes what comes next. And what comes next was not going to be survivable if she waited for it to become obvious. She pushed through the side door into the summer night, and the difference in air hit her like a hand-clean hot August close, but breathable. Behind her, she could already hear it, the low building sound of fire finding its footing in dry paper and old wood. Webb came through behind her, coughing. "The front section," he said. Someone said it in the front section. "The filing cabinets." "The current records," she said. "All the recent filings. Everything from the last 5 years." He was shaking. "Everything Rook filed. All the debt transfers, all the deed modifications. He's burning his own records." Webb stared at her. "Why would he?" "Because he's burning ours too." She grabbed his arm. "The families, the evidence, the copies you made, where are they?" "At my house, locked." "Is your house safe tonight?" He looked at her. He understood. "I don't know." She pulled him toward the road. "Come with me. Now. Don't go back to your house alone." They were 30 yards from the building when the first window blew out. The sound of it was enormous in the summer quiet. A hard, concussive crack followed immediately by a rush of heat and light that turned the darkness orange. Abigail stopped moving for exactly 1 second and looked back. The front of the courthouse was fully engaged. Fire moved through dry paper the way water moves through sand, fast, complete, indifferent. Inside that building were the land records, the debt ledgers, the death filings, and the names of every family. Elias Rook had spent a decade grinding into the dirt. Inside that building was evidence that would have taken her months to compile from scratch. She turned away from it and kept moving. Nathaniel came out of the darkness of the tree line at a run, or as close to a run as a man with his leg would allow, which was faster than she'd expected. Clara was behind him. "Are you?" he started. "I have it." She touched her side where the folded page pressed against her ribs. "I have the deed." She looked past him at the courthouse. "We need to move." He set the fire deliberately. "I know." His voice was tight. "I've seen 2 riders. They were watching the building. When the fire started, they moved to the back road." He looked at Webb. "You're the clerk." "Yes, sir." "Your name is known to Rook's people." Webb's face answered before he did. "Then you don't go home tonight," Nathaniel said. He looked at Clara. "My cousin in Fredericksburg," Clara said immediately. She was already thinking 3 steps ahead. Abigail had noticed this about Clara, the way she processed fast and communicated only results. "He can be there by morning if he rides now." "I'll arrange the horse," Nathaniel said. He put his hand briefly on Webb's shoulder, not comfort exactly, but acknowledgement. "You did right coming to us. We won't forget it." Webb nodded. He still looked like a man in shock, but he was holding together. Some people Abigail had observed held together better in crisis than in calm. Thomas Webb appeared to be one of them. Clara took him toward the stable. Abigail and Nathaniel were left standing in the orange-lit dark, the sound of the fire carrying across the summer night behind them, voices beginning to emerge from nearby properties as people woke to the glow. "They moved fast," she said, "faster than I expected." He was watching the darkness between the trees. "Which means they are more frightened than I expected." He looked at her. "You were inside when it started." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. Something moved through his expression, quick, controlled, gone before she could name it. "You are unhurt." "I am unhurt." She met his eyes. "Nathaniel." "We need to move," he said. "The riders will come back around when they realize the building is not empty." She started to agree, and that was when she heard the horse. Not on the road, from the wrong direction. From the tree line to their left, where there was no road, which meant someone had been waiting there already positioned before the fire started. Which meant this was not improvised. Which meant it had been planned with a specific endpoint in mind, and that endpoint was not the building. That endpoint was them. Nathaniel heard it the same moment she did. She saw his hand move to his coat, a trained automatic movement that told her he was carrying something she had not known about. "Get behind me," he said. "That is not Abigail. Behind me." She moved. Not because she was accustomed to being behind anyone, But because she was calculating she had the deed against her ribs, she had no weapon, and Nathaniel had at least one of the latter, and apparently knew how to use it. 2 men came out of the tree line on horseback. Then a third on foot, moving faster than the riders in the way men on foot sometimes move in close terrain where horses are a liability. The one on foot was carrying a pistol. What happened next happened in the specific compressed time of events that are over, before you have fully understood them as events. Nathaniel spoke a command sharp and authoritative in the voice of a man who expected to be obeyed. The riders pulled up. The man on foot did not. He kept moving. And then he raised the pistol. The shot hit Nathaniel in the left arm. The impact spun him not dramatically, not the way she had imagined gunshot wounds in the rare moments she had allowed herself to imagine them. Just a sharp, violent interruption of motion, and then he was down on one knee with his hand pressed to his arm and his own pistol in his other hand, and the expression of a man who was furious at having let this happen. "Nathaniel." She was moving before the decision was conscious. "Stay back." His voice was strained, but still the same low, controlled voice. "Stay back, Abigail." The man on foot was still coming. She looked at the ground beside Nathaniel. The pistol that had fallen from his right hand when he went down, he had transferred it to support himself, and it was lying in the dirt 2 feet from where she stood. She looked at it with the specific clarity of a moment where everything except the necessary thing falls away. She had never fired a pistol in her life. She had watched men handle them. She had read about the mechanism. She had the particular quality of mind that translated reading into understanding and understanding into something adjacent to preparation. The man raised the knife. Abigail picked up the pistol. Her hands were steady. They were not supposed to be steady. She understood that even in the moment. Her whole body should have been shaking. But the steadiness that had carried her through her stepmother's house and her mother's funeral and a forced wedding and a burning courthouse came from somewhere so deep in her that crisis apparently could not reach it. She cocked the hammer the way she had read that you cocked a hammer. She pointed it the way logic told you to point it. She fired. The man went down. Not dead, she could hear him. He was down and he was hurt, and he was not in that moment raising a knife over Nathaniel Whitaker. The 2 riders broke. Fast. Back into the tree line, and gone in the direction of the road. And then there was nothing but the sound of the fire in the distance, and the summer insects reclaiming the silence, and Nathaniel's ragged breathing from where he knelt in the dirt. She stood with the pistol in her hand, and her arms slowly coming down, and the specific sensation moving through her body of something that was not triumph, and was not relief, and was not pride. It was something she did not have a word for, the sensation of having done a thing you did not know you could do, and finding it less like discovery and more like recognition. She had always been this. She just hadn't had the occasion to know it. Her hands began to shake about 30 seconds after the riders disappeared. She let them shake. She did not put the pistol down until she was certain it was safe to put it down. And then she set it on the ground carefully and went to Nathaniel. "Let me see," she said. Let me see." She pulled his hand away from his arm. The wound was high on the outside of the upper arm, painful, significant, but not the kind of wound that ended things. She had helped the housekeeper treat injuries on the Mercer property often enough to know the difference between a wound that needed immediate action and one that could be managed. This one could be managed. "Press it again, hard." He pressed it. He looked at her face, at her hands, at the pistol on the ground. "You shot him," he said. "Yes? You've never moved?" "No." She looked at him steadily. "I have now." A pause. He was watching her with the expression she still did not have a name for, the one that was not the calculating look, the one that had appeared first when she'd said, "Don't manage me, try working with me." It was more present now, more direct. "Are you all right?" he said. It was the first time he had asked her that. Not about the task, not about the evidence, not about the situation, about her. "I will be," she said, because that was the honest answer, and she had decided a long time ago that honest answers were a form of respect she extended to people who had earned it. He nodded once. He accepted that the way he accepted most of what she said without argument, with the particular attention of a man who was listening to a great deal more than the words. Clara came out of the dark at a near run with a look on her face that shifted from alarm to assessment in about 2 seconds when she saw them both upright. "The clerk is gone," she said. "He's writing. He'll make it." She took in Nathaniel's arm, the pistol on the ground, the man still down at the edge of the tree line. She took in Abigail's expression. She did not ask the obvious question. "We need to get inside. The constable will be at the courthouse inside the hour." "Webb's attacker," Abigail said. "We can't leave him here." "He's alive," Clara said. "Yes." Clara thought for approximately 3 seconds. "We bring him inside. He either talks, or he waits for us to decide what to do with him." She looked at Nathaniel. "Can you walk?" "I can walk," Nathaniel said, with the specific irritation of a man who does not enjoy being asked that question. Clara looked at Abigail. "You picked up the pistol?" "Yes." "Good." Clara's voice was completely matter-of-fact. "Help me with his arm." They moved. Clara and Abigail on either side of Nathaniel, the summer fire still burning orange against the sky behind them. The downed man being dealt with by the 2 housemen who materialized from the property with the efficiency of people who had been told to be ready for trouble and had taken the instructions seriously. Inside, with Nathaniel seated and his wound being cleaned with the grim practicality that Clara brought to everything, the downed man was brought in and set in a chair in the kitchen passage. He was conscious. He had a grazed hip. Her shot had not been where she'd aimed, but had achieved the intended result, which was stopping forward motion, and she was willing to call that sufficient for a first attempt. He looked at Abigail with the specific expression of a man who had not expected to be looking at a woman holding the outcome of this evening. "Who sent you?" she said. He said nothing. "You were positioned before the fire started," she said. "That means you knew about the fire before it happened, which means you are connected to the people who planned it." She sat down across from him and put her hands flat on her knees in a posture she had learned from watching her father hold court, the posture of a person who has decided they are in charge of this conversation. "Now, you can tell me what I want to know, and I will tell the constable you cooperated. Or you can say nothing, and the constable will find you in a chair in the home of a man who has been investigating crimes in this county for 2 years, and who has, as of tonight, a great deal of new evidence to offer." She held his gaze. "I would suggest talking." He looked at her. Then at Nathaniel, who was sitting at the table with his arm bandaged and his expression completely flat and his attention entirely on the man in the chair. Then back at Abigail. He talked. His name was Cyrus Hale. He worked for Gerald Fitch, not for Rook, for Fitch directly, which confirmed what Nathaniel had suspected about the structure of the operation. Rook was the money. Fitch was the architecture. The fire had been Fitch's order given that afternoon when someone Cyrus did not know who had reported that a woman had been asking questions about courthouse records. The woman, Abigail Mercer Cross, who had sat at Elias Rook's dinner table 2 nights ago and said, "I was not rescued. I was underestimated," and had apparently been assessed by Gerald Fitch afterward as a threat specific enough to warrant action. She sat with that for a moment. The courthouse was burning because of her, because Fitch had looked at her across that dinner table with his calculating eyes and seen clearly what Rook had dismissed. She was not certain whether to be sobered by that or to find it useful. She decided to find it useful. "Fitch ordered the fire," she said. "What else did he order tonight?" Cyrus Hale looked at his hands. "A visit," he said, "to the county land registry office, tomorrow morning." She looked at him. "The vault." "Whatever is in the vault that hasn't already burned." He paused. "He said to make sure nothing in that vault survives the week." The room was quiet. Clara looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel looked at Abigail. She reached inside her dress and removed the folded page. She set it on the table between them. The original deed. Her mother's name at the top, in the clean, careful ink of a county surveyor who had done his job honestly in 1809, and had no way of knowing what it would cost. Then it's fortunate, Abigail said, that the most important thing in that vault is no longer in that vault. She looked at Nathaniel. He was looking at the deed, then at her. And there was something in his face that she had not seen there before. Not the calculation, not the assessment, not the adjacent to respect. Something more unguarded than any of those. "You kept it," he said. "I told you," she said. "I don't leave things behind." Outside the courthouse was still burning. She could feel the distant heat of it through the walls, the summer night carrying the smell of it, old paper and wood, and the evidence of a decade of crimes that Elias Rook had decided needed to disappear. He had not been wrong about what needed to disappear. He had simply moved too slowly and underestimated the wrong person, and those two mistakes were going to cost him everything. Abigail looked at the deed on the table. She looked at the man in the chair who had just told them everything Fitch intended. She looked at Nathaniel's bandaged arm and Clara's steady face and the window where the August darkness pressed close and indifferent around all of them. Then she straightened in her chair and she pressed both hands flat on the table and she said, "All right, here is what we do next." The plan she laid out that night was not elegant. Elegance was for people who had time and safety and options they hadn't already used. What Abigail had was a burned courthouse, a wounded husband, a frightened clerk riding toward Fredericksburg, and a deed pressed flat on a table that proved everything and meant nothing until there was a court willing to hear it. She looked at the three of them, Nathaniel with his arm bandaged and his jaw set, Clara with her hands folded and her eyes sharp, Cyrus Hale in the chair, looking like a man who had just discovered that the side he'd chosen was not the side that was going to win. "We cannot go through the courts," she said. "Not here. Not in this county. Fitch controls the county bench and Rook controls Fitch. Any document we file will be challenged, delayed, or buried before a judge who has already been paid to bury it." She paused. "So we don't file. We don't litigate. We don't give Rook the private battlefield where he has already beaten everyone who came before us." "Then what?" Clara said. "We make it public." She looked at the deed on the table. Every crime Rook has committed was designed to happen quietly, one family at a time, one forged document at a time, each one isolated from the others so that no single victim ever understood they were part of a larger pattern. She looked up. "So we end the isolation. We put every family in the same room at the same time with the same evidence, and we do it where anyone in this county can see it." Nathaniel was watching her. "A town meeting. A town meeting." She met his eyes. "And we need someone the community trusts to call it, not us. We are too new here. We are too connected to the case." She looked at Clara. "You mentioned a man, Samuel Pike." "The blacksmith," Clara said. "He's organized 2 petitions and a county road dispute in the last 4 years. People listen to him. Can we reach him tonight?" "I can have a rider to his property within the hour. Do it." She turned to Nathaniel. "Fitch ordered whatever remains in the courthouse vault destroyed this week. That means he moves in the next few days. We have less time than I'd like." "When do you want the meeting?" 3 days. She stood. "I need 2 days to find the families." Clara looked at her with an expression that was as close to surprised as Clara appeared capable of getting. "You intend to go to them yourself? Someone has to, and it can't be you." She nodded at Nathaniel. "Because Rook's men are watching for you specifically now." She straightened. "I am still officially a young woman recently married and new to this county. I have reasonable cause to call on neighbors. No one will find that alarming." "Rook will," Nathaniel said. "Rook already finds me alarming. That ship has sailed." She picked up the deed and looked at it once more. Her mother's inheritance, 7 years in a vault one night, in a burning building, and now here in her hands. "He burned the courthouse because he was afraid of what we had. Let him spend the next 3 days afraid and uncertain. That fear is working for us every hour he sits in it." Cyrus Hale from his chair said quietly, "He'll come for you." Everyone looked at him. He looked at Abigail with something that had shifted in his expression since he'd started talking less, the hired muscle, more the man underneath it who had apparently still had one functioning conscience left. "When he realizes what you're doing," Hale said. "He won't wait for the meeting." "I know," Abigail said. "He's killed people before, not personally, but he's given the order." Hale looked at his hands. "Your mother." The word landed in the room like a stone in still water. Abigail did not move. She did not look away from him. She waited. "There were conversations," Hale said, carefully. "Before she died. Fitch and 2 others. I wasn't in the room, but I was near enough to hear the word problem used in connection with her name." He stopped. "I didn't understand at the time what that meant. I do now." The silence that followed was not quiet. It had too much weight in it to be quiet. "You're telling me," Abigail said, and her voice was very steady, the steadiest it had been all night, "that my mother's death was not an accident." Hale said nothing, which was its own answer. Nathaniel said her name, just once, low and careful. She heard everything in it, the warning, the steadying intention, the acknowledgement that what had just been said changed the nature of what they were doing. She already knew it changed the nature of what they were doing. She had suspected it since the cedar chest. She had been building toward this confirmation, the way you build toward the end of an equation, knowing the answer was going to require something from you before you finished writing it. "Then we move in 3 days," she said, "and we move with everything we have." Samuel Pike came himself the next morning. He was a large man, deliberate in the way men are deliberate when they have spent their lives doing work that required precision, and he listened to Abigail for 20 minutes without interrupting once. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I knew 9 of those families. 2 of them I helped move out when they lost their land. I told myself at the time it was legal." He paused. "I was wrong about that. Will you call the meeting?" she said. "I'll do more than call it." He looked at Nathaniel. "I'll make sure every man, woman, and working family in 3 counties knows to be there." He looked back at Abigail with the particular expression of someone who has been waiting for the right moment to do a thing they should have done earlier. "You find the witnesses, I'll find the crowd." She found the witnesses by covering 20 miles in 2 days. She went on horseback alone in the summer heat that had not relented. She went to the families on her list, the 11 from the ledgers, and 4 more she found by asking careful questions of the ones who had already agreed to talk. A widow named Ruth Calloway, who had watched her husband's farm transferred to a debt-holding company 6 months after he died in the war. 2 brothers named Alcott, who had received a notice of unpaid taxes on land their father had owned clear since 1800. A freed family named Mason, who had built a home on legally purchased land and arrived one morning to find a county notice nailing a lien to the door. Each time she sat down at whatever table was offered and she said, "I know what happened to you. I know it wasn't legal, and I know you are not alone." Each time she watched the same thing happen in the person across the table, a tightening. First, the defensive instinct of someone who has been hurt and learned not to let on, and then a gradual opening as the specific relief of being believed by someone with the means to act on it worked its way through years of hardened resignation. 3 people said no. She thanked them and left without argument. What she needed were people who were ready, not people who had been pressured into it because pressured witnesses crumbled under Rook's lawyers, and she was not going to hand him that. 19 said yes. She was 2 hours out from the property on the 2nd afternoon when Clara's rider found her on the road. "Something's happened," he said. It was her father. Judge Silas Mercer had arrived at the property that morning, not with Rook's men, not with a legal summons. Alone on a horse, he'd saddled himself in the particular manner of a man who does not want anyone to know he has gone somewhere. He had asked for Abigail and had been told she was not there, and he had sat in the front room with his hat in his hands and said he would wait. She found him there 2 hours later. He looked worse than he had at the wedding. Whatever weight he had been carrying had increased in the intervening days, and the effort of carrying it was visible in every line of him. She sat down across from him and said nothing. He said, "I heard about the courthouse. Most of the county has heard about the courthouse." Abigail. "Don't," she said. Don't start with my name in that voice. That voice is what you use when you want me to make something easier for you. I am not going to make this easier for you." He looked at his hat. "No, I don't suppose you are." A pause. "Rook called a meeting," he said. "His men have been riding out this morning. He intends to hold it the day after tomorrow, at the courthouse site." He looked up at her. He wants to control the conversation about the fire before anyone else can. The information hit her like a key in a lock. Rook was calling the meeting himself. He intended to stand in front of the community and deliver his version of events, and he intended to do it before Samuel Pike's call went out far enough to shift the ground under him. He wanted the stage, and he wanted it first. She thought about that for exactly 4 seconds. "Then we use his meeting," she said. Her father stared at her. "I beg your pardon. He calls the meeting. He arranges the crowd. He brings everyone together in one place." She looked at her father with the clear, flat look she had developed over years of watching him fail to protect her, and decided this was the moment to use it for something other than survival. "And then we show up with everything we have in front of everyone," he gathered. Her father's face went through several things in rapid succession. Then he said very quietly, "He will have men there. So will we." "Abigail, you don't understand what he is capable of." "Father." Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. "I understand exactly what he is capable of. Cyrus Hale told me." She held his gaze. "And I think you understand it too. I think you have understood it for a long time. I think that is why you looked at the floor at my wedding instead of at me." The silence between them was different from the silences she had held with Nathaniel or Clara. It was older. It had the particular texture of a thing that had been sitting in a room for years without being named. Her father set his hat on his knee and looked at it. "Your mother came to me. Before she came to me and she told me what she had found, what Rook was doing. She showed me documents." He stopped. "I told her to put them away. I told her she didn't understand what she was dealing with." Abigail said nothing. "She told me I was wrong." His voice had gone rough. "She was right. She was right about all of it, and I told her to put the papers away, and 3 months later she was dead, and I have sat with that every day since." He looked up. Not at her, at some point past her, at something she could not see. "I signed what Rook put in front of me because I was afraid, and I told myself it was legal enough, and other men were doing worse, and that the families losing land were probably managing, and every single one of those things was a lie. I told myself so I did not have to be what I was, which was a coward." The room was very quiet. "The day after tomorrow," Abigail said, "Rook's meeting, will you stand up in front of those people and say what you just said to me?" Her father looked at her. His eyes were the eyes of a man who has been afraid so long that being asked to stop is its own kind of terrifying. "It will not help me," he said. "Not with the law, not with what I signed." "No," she agreed. "It won't. I'm not asking you to do it for yourself." A long pause. "Your mother would be very angry with me," he said. "Yes? And very proud of you." She didn't answer that. She couldn't quite. She filed it away in the same place she filed the things that needed to be felt later when there was time. "The day after tomorrow," she said again. He nodded once. It was a small movement, but it was definite. The morning of the meeting, Nathaniel's arm was stiff but functional, and his expression was the expression of a man who had decided what he was going to do, and had moved all the way past doubt into a kind of clear, forward-facing calm. He checked the papers they were bringing, the deed, the 11 forged documents Abigail had identified the copies Webb had made before he rode north. The letters from her mother, numbered and dated and coded in a system that Abigail could now translate fully. He checked them twice. She let him because it was how he managed the thing underneath, the same way she managed the thing underneath, by keeping her hands busy and her mind on the next step. Clara pressed a hand briefly to Abigail's arm before they left. Not a hug. Not sentiment. The specific, solid gesture of a woman communicating something that didn't need words. Abigail covered her hand with her own for one moment. Then they went. The crowd at the courthouse site was larger than Rook had intended. That was the first thing she registered when they arrived, the sheer number of people spread wide and continuing to grow, and the particular quality of that crowd, which was not the manageable assembly of tenants and civic acquaintances that Rook had summoned. Samuel Pike had done his work. The farmers were there, the widows were there. Ruth Calloway stood near the front with the particular posture of a woman who has decided she is done being quiet about something. The Alcott brothers were there. The Mason family. Faces she recognized from 2 days of kitchen tables and careful conversations, and beyond them, filling in behind people she had not spoken to. Neighbors and tradespeople and ordinary families who had heard that something was happening and had come because something was always happening to someone they knew, and they were tired of watching it happen. Elias Rook arrived to a crowd that was his in name only. She watched him read that. He was good at reading rooms, she had seen that at his dinner table. She watched him take in the faces and the size and the specific quality of the assembly, and she watched the adjustment happen behind his eyes, the rapid recalculation of a man who has arrived for a performance, and discovered that someone has changed the script. He stepped to the front with the confidence of a man who had been the most powerful person in every room he'd entered for 30 years. Nathaniel stepped up on his right. Abigail stepped up on his left. Rook looked at both of them. His expression did not change. "Mr. Cross," he said, "I did not expect to see you here." "I imagine not," Nathaniel said. "This is a community meeting, a private matter of concern to local property owners." "Then it concerns us," Abigail said. "We are local property owners." She looked past him at the crowd, at the faces she knew and the faces she didn't, at Ruth Calloway in the front row, at her father standing near the back hat in his hands not looking at the floor. And it concerns every family standing here who has lost land to a forged document or a manufactured debt in the last 10 years. Rook turned to her fully. His voice when he used it was still smooth, still controlled, but underneath it, like a current under still water, something had shifted. "Mrs. Cross, I don't know what you believe you. Lot 7, Harmon County," she said. "Debt filing dated October 1813. Filed against a property transfer that was already completed in June of the same year." She held up the first document. The debt was backdated. The signature on the filing belongs to a county officer who died in 1812. She let that land. "That is forgery. That is one count." She held up the next page. Lot 14, same county, same pattern, 1814. The next page. Lot 22, 1815. The crowd was completely silent. "I have 11, she said. "My husband has more, and we have the original deed proving that the property at the center of this network was legally held by my mother before a single forged document was filed against it." She looked directly at Rook. "We have the chain, we have the intent, and we have the architect." Rook looked past her at the crowd. She knew what he was calculating, the sheriff, the men he'd brought, the possible routes through this that did not end where this was clearly heading. "Sheriff Granger," Rook said. His voice was still controlled, but the smoothness had left it. "This woman is making slanderous allegations in a public setting. I want to speak." It was her father. Judge Silas Mercer moved through the crowd from the back. People made room for him not out of respect exactly, but out of the particular uncertainty of watching a judge move with an expression that did not look like a judge performing authority. He walked to the front, and he stood beside Abigail, and he did not look at Rook. He looked at the crowd. "I am Silas Mercer," he said. "I have served as a county judge in this district for 14 years. In that time I signed documents I should not have signed. I approved filings I knew were irregular. I told myself the law was the law, and men with power had always used it to their advantage, and there was nothing to be done about that." His voice was not steady. He did not try to make it steady. "My wife found proof of what those filings actually were. She brought it to me. I told her to leave it alone." He stopped for a moment. "I am telling you now what I should have told her then. These documents are fraudulent. The debts are manufactured. The land seizures were illegal, and the man responsible for orchestrating them is standing in front of you. Elias Rook's face, for the first time since Abigail had met him, showed something underneath the surface. Not fear, not quite. The specific expression of a man watching a wall he had built over 30 years develop a crack that he already understands goes all the way through. Sheriff Granger had moved. He had moved during her father's speech quietly to a position that placed him between Rook and the road. Rook looked at him. "Sheriff," he started. "Mr. Rook," the sheriff said. He did not look comfortable. He looked like a man making a decision that he knew was going to cost him something, and had decided the cost was worth paying. "I'm going to have to ask you to come with me." Rook looked at the crowd. The crowd looked back at him. 19 families who had shown up with their names and their stories, and behind them the wider ring of people who had been watching and listening and had made up their minds somewhere during Silas Mercer's voice-breaking on the word wife. He looked at Abigail last. She met his gaze with the same clear, flat look she had been developing since she was 16 years old, and first understood that the world was not going to protect her. She had stopped waiting for the world to protect her. She had built something better. Rook went with the sheriff. Not quietly, he had words clipped and furious and aimed at lawyers and circuit courts and the nature of due process, but he went. His 2 men stood at the edge of the crowd and looked at each other and made the calculation that men make when the numbers have changed, and they did not intervene. Ruth Calloway let out a breath that was not quite a sound. One of the Alcott brothers put his hat back on his head and looked at his brother and didn't say anything. The Mason family stood close together the way people stand when they have spent so long braced for impact that the absence of it takes a moment to believe. Nathaniel came to stand beside Abigail. He said nothing. She said nothing. They stood together in front of the crowd, and in front of the burned-out shell of the courthouse, and in front of the summer sky that was blue and hard and indifferent above all of it, and neither of them needed to speak because the thing that needed to be said had already been said. Her father was still standing near the front. He looked older than he had that morning. He looked like a man who has put something down that he has been carrying for a very long time and who is not sure yet whether he feels lighter or emptier. He looked at Abigail. She looked back at him. She did not go to him. Not yet. That conversation was for later, when there was space for it, when the dust of this morning had settled into something she could see clearly. But she held his look, long enough for him to know that she had heard what he said, long enough for him to know she would remember it. Then she turned to the crowd that Elias Rook had called, and she and Nathaniel had remade into something else entirely. And she said clearly, and without performance, "The deed and the documentation will be filed with the circuit court within the week. Anyone who wishes to have their case reviewed should give their name and their county filing number to my husband. We will do this together, and we will do it correctly." Ruth Calloway stepped forward first. Then the Alcott brothers. Then more people moving toward them with the specific purpose of people who have been waiting for permission to do something they already decided they wanted to do. Samuel Pike found his way to Abigail's side. He looked at the scene in front of them with the expression of a man who has been waiting a long time to see something go right. "Well," he said quietly, "how about that?" "How about that?" Abigail agreed. The arrest of Elias Rook did not end things. She had known it wouldn't. Men like Rook did not fall cleanly. They fell, the way old structures fell, slow and loud, and taking pieces of everything around them on the way down. His lawyers arrived from Richmond within 2 days. His bail was arranged by 2 county merchants who had profited from his network and were now calculating whether loyalty or distance served them better. The circuit court process, Nathaniel warned her, would move like a river in August present, but unhurried, going exactly where it intended at exactly the pace it chose. She had not expected it to be fast. She had prepared for it to be long. What she had not prepared for was Gerald Fitch. He had not been at the meeting. When the sheriff went to his office the morning after Rook's arrest, Fitch was gone. His desk was cleared of the documents that mattered. His house showed the signs of departure that came with planning, not panic, but calculation. He had seen what was coming fast enough to move before it arrived. "He's been gone at least a day," the deputy told Nathaniel. Nathaniel told Abigail. She was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Which road? We don't know. Then we find out. She looked at Samuel Pike, who had become a daily presence at the property in the days since the meeting, not because anyone had officially designated him anything, but because he was the kind of man who identified what needed doing and did it. Samuel. Who in this county knows Fitch's habits well enough to know where he'd go when he ran? Pike thought for a moment. His brother-in-law has a mill operation on the Rappahannock. Fitch has ridden that direction every fall for 20 years. Send a rider. Already thinking it. He was already turning toward the door. She turned back to Nathaniel. His arm was healing stiffer than he wanted it to be, she could tell by the way he held it, but functional. He was looking at her with that expression she had learned to read over the past weeks. Not the calculation anymore, not even the adjacent to respect. Something that had settled into something steadier and more honest than either. You're not going to wait for the court to move on its own, he said. I'll work with the court, she said. But the court needs material to work with. Fitch had documents we haven't seen. If he ran with them, we need to know what he took. She paused. And if he ran without them, then they're still in his office somewhere. Then we need to be there before his people are. They were at Fitch's office within the hour. What they found took another hour to fully understand because Fitch had been careful in the way. Careful people are careful removing the obvious things, leaving the things he considered too embedded in the ordinary filing system to be found quickly. He had underestimated, as everyone underestimated, the specific quality of attention Abigail brought to a room full of documents. She found it in the third drawer of the secondary cabinet. A ledger she had not seen before, smaller than the courthouse records privately maintained, with a cipher system that was less sophisticated than her mother's, and significantly less patient. She worked through it in 40 minutes. When she looked up, Nathaniel was watching her. There is a state land commissioner, she said, involved since 1811. His name appears 12 times in this ledger, in connection with approvals that should have required a higher review process. She held up the ledger. Rook's lawyers are going to argue that the county corruption was isolated, that their client was operating within a flawed local system he did not control. She set the ledger down. This destroys that argument. This goes above the county, above the circuit court. This is a state matter. The silence that followed had a different quality than the silences before it. If this reaches the state level, Nathaniel said slowly, Rook's lawyers cannot contain it locally. No, they cannot. She closed the ledger, and neither can his money. She sent a copy of Fitch's ledger to Thomas Webb in Fredericksburg, who had, with the particular resilience of a frightened man who had found his footing already arranged to provide testimony from a safe distance. She sent a second copy to a circuit court judge in the next district, whom Clara had identified as one of the 11 in the region, who had not yet been reached by Rook's network. She kept the original herself with the deed, with the forged documents with her mother's letters, the full accumulated record of a decade of crimes, organized into the kind of evidence that was not going to be easy to argue away, regardless of how well paid the lawyers arguing were. Gerald Fitch was found at his brother-in-law's mill 4 days later. He was brought back to the county on a Tuesday morning. He did not speak on the ride back. He did not speak when he was brought in front of the sheriff. He waited until he was sitting across from a court-appointed officer of record, and then he talked for 3 hours, and what he said was considerably more than anyone had expected, because Fitch had spent 30 years watching the men above him and had documented his own role in things with the careful, self-protective instinct of a man who always suspected he might need leverage someday. He had just not expected the leverage to work against him. Abigail was not in the room when Fitch talked. She was across town at Ruth Calloway's farm. Ruth had received word that morning that the Land Commission had agreed to review her case as part of the broader inquiry, that the debt filing against her husband's property was being formally flagged as potentially fraudulent, that she should not in the meantime allow anyone access to the land without a court officer present. Abigail had brought the letter herself. Ruth read it twice. She was a woman in her mid-40s who had the particular weathered quality of someone who had spent the years since her husband's death doing the work of 2 people on land that everyone around her expected her to eventually give up. She set the letter on the table and looked at it for a long moment. "Is this real?" she said. "It is real," Abigail said. Ruth looked at her. "I filed a complaint with the county 3 years ago. The clerk told me I didn't understand how debt law worked and sent me home." "I know." "I went back twice." "I know." Ruth looked at the letter again. Something moved through her face, not quite belief, yet something more careful than belief, the expression of a person who has been disappointed so many times that hope requires a certain amount of evidence before it will agree to be felt. "What do I do?" she said. "Keep the letter. When someone from the commission comes, you show it to them. You tell them everything exactly as it happened. You don't adjust anything to make it sound more legal or more sympathetic. You just tell it plain the way you told me." Abigail looked at her steadily. "You have been telling the truth for 3 years. Keep telling it. The difference now is that someone with the authority to act on it is required to listen." Ruth folded the letter with careful hands. She looked at Abigail with an expression that had traveled through doubt and something like grief, and landed somewhere more open. "Your mother," she said. "Did you know she came to see me once years ago, before she died? She asked me about my husband's deed. She took notes." Abigail had not known that. She sat with it for a moment, the image of her mother on this same road, at this same table, asking the same careful questions. 8 months of letters to Clara. A leather packet of documents in a cedar chest. A deed in a courthouse vault that had survived everything they'd thrown at it. "She knew," Abigail said. "She knew about your family. She said she was going to fix it." Ruth looked at her hands. "I never heard from her again." "She fixed it," Abigail said. "It just took a little longer than she planned." She rode back to their property in the late afternoon with the summer heat beginning its slow daily retreat and the road empty in both directions and her thoughts moving at the particular pace they moved when she was processing something that needed more than analysis. Her mother had been at Ruth Calloway's table. Her mother had taken notes. Her mother had been building the same case from the same starting point 8 years ago with the same quality of careful patient attention and had been stopped before she could finish it. Abigail had finished it. She did not feel triumphant about that. She felt something more complicated, the specific sensation of completing someone else's work, of carrying something across a distance on behalf of a person who could no longer carry it themselves. It was not victory. It was something closer to keeping a promise. A promise that had never been spoken aloud, but had been written carefully in numbered letters sent to a woman her mother had never met in the particular faith of someone who believed the truth was worth the effort of preserving, even when the people preserving it could not be certain anyone would ever come looking for it. Someone had come looking for it. Nathaniel was on the front step when she arrived. He stood when he heard the horse in automatic motion, the kind that had become habit over the past weeks. The specific alertness of a man who had learned to pay attention to who was arriving and who was not. When he saw it was her, the alertness shifted into something quieter. "Fitch talked," he said. "I heard." She dismounted. "The state commissioner. Confirmed. The inquiry will expand." He paused. "It's going to take months, possibly longer." "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "The Whitaker family's attorney is coming next week. With the cover no longer necessary, my real name, the real holdings, it opens certain possibilities." He looked at her with that direct, careful expression. "For both of us." She looked back at him. They had been living in the same house for weeks now, working from the same table, sleeping under the same roof. And the thing between them had been shifting by increments, not dramatically, not with declaration, but in the way that genuine things shift slowly, then undeniably. She had noticed it. She suspected he had noticed it. Neither of them had addressed it directly because they were both people who did not address things directly until they were certain of what they were addressing. She was beginning to be certain. "What possibilities?" she said. "A permanent base here. The legal infrastructure to continue the land recovery cases, not just ours. There are families in 4 other counties who have received notices from the same network. If Rook's case establishes the precedent." "It will establish the precedent," she said. If it does, then there is work to be done well beyond this county. Work that would require... He stopped. Work that would require someone with a particular quality of mind for finding the number that doesn't fit. He looked at her. I am not asking you to continue because I need you to. I am asking because I believe you intend to regardless, and I would rather do it together than spend the next several years working in parallel. She studied him. He held the look without flinching, which was one of the things she had come to respect about him. He did not look away from things he had decided to look at squarely. That is the least romantic speech I have ever heard, she said. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. It was not intended as a romantic speech. I know. She looked at him for another moment. Yes, she said. He waited. Yes to continuing. Yes to together. She held his gaze. And yes to everything else if you're going to be too careful to say it plainly. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I was going to say it plainly. When I was certain you were finished deciding. I've been decided for 2 weeks, she said. You were waiting for something that already happened. Something shifted in his face fully this time, without the calculation or the assessment or the careful management of expression. Just the face of a man who has arrived somewhere he had not been certain he was going to arrive. 2 weeks, he said. At least. He nodded once. I'll try to be faster in the future. I'd appreciate that. Clara appeared in the doorway behind him with the expression of a woman who had observed this exchange and found it approximately as satisfying as she had expected to. She said nothing. She went back inside. The door closed. Abigail looked at Nathaniel, and he looked at her, and neither of them said anything, because the thing that needed to be said had been said, and what was left was the particular quality of silence that comes not from the absence of words, but from the presence of something that doesn't require them. The circuit court ruling came 6 weeks later. The Mason family's land was restored. First, the commission had prioritized the cases where the forgery was most direct and the original ownership most clearly documented. Then the Alcott brothers. Then Ruth Calloway, who received the formal notice on a Wednesday morning and was found by her neighbor an hour later, sitting on the front step of the farmhouse that had been her husband's and would be her children's, holding the paper in both hands, and not crying, or not exactly crying, doing something that was its own word for a thing that happened when a person who had held on for a very long time was finally allowed to put something down. Abigail heard about it from Samuel Pike. She asked me to tell you, he said. She said she didn't think she could say it to your face without making a fool of herself. Tell her she wouldn't have, Abigail said. Tell her she never has. Rook's trial was scheduled for the following spring. His lawyers were expensive and creative, and Abigail did not expect the process to be simple. But the state commissioner's involvement had shifted the weight of it. The case was no longer a county matter that a county judge could quietly redirect. It was on record. It was documented. It was in the hands of people who had not yet been bought, and the window for buying them was closing daily, as more names appeared in Fitch's ledger and more families came forward with their stories. One afternoon in late September, when the summer heat had finally begun to release its hold on the county, and the air carried the first suggestion of what was coming, Nathaniel found her at the table. Not the working table, a different table in a room Clara had cleared and repurposed. There were women around it. 3 of them with documents in front of them, land survey forms, debt notices, the specific dense paperwork of county record-keeping, and Abigail was moving between them, pointing to clauses, explaining in plain language what the formal wording actually required and what it did not, what a signatory gave up and what they retained. He stood in the doorway and watched for a moment. She did not look up. She was explaining a lien provision to a woman in her 30s, whose husband was in debt to a merchant connected to 2 of the county's secondary fraud cases. The woman was following carefully her pen, moving over her own copy of the form, her face showing the particular concentrated expression of someone learning a thing. They understood immediately. They should have been taught years ago. Initial here only if the term is under 2 years, Abigail was saying. If it runs longer, you write your objection on the reverse, and you do not initial until it's been revised. Do you understand the difference? Yes, the woman said. Say it back to me. The woman said it back, correctly. Good, Abigail said. Now the next clause. Nathaniel stayed in the doorway until the lesson was done. When the women had left with their forms and their notes and the specific bearing of people who have been given a tool they intend to use, he came into the room and sat down across from where she was gathering papers. How many this week? He said. 7 women, 2 this morning, 3 yesterday, 2 more tomorrow. She stacked the papers with both hands flat to even the edges. There are families in the next county who have been receiving notices from the secondary network, the merchant group that ran parallel to Rook's operation. They need the same education before anyone can help them legally. I know. He watched her. I want to ask you something. She looked up. When this is settled, Rook's trial, the commission review the last of the family cases. Do you want a quiet life? She looked at him steadily. It was a real question. She could hear that it was real, not rhetorical, not leading toward a point he had already decided. He was asking because he genuinely wanted to know the answer, and he was the kind of man who asked questions he intended to respect, regardless of which direction the answer went. She thought about it honestly. She thought about the cedar chest, and the leather packet, and the numbered letters. She thought about a courthouse vault and a page pressed flat against her ribs while a building burned. She thought about Ruth Calloway's face when she read that letter. She thought about a woman at this table an hour ago, learning to read a lien clause, saying it back correctly, and understanding for the first time that the paper in front of her was not something being done to her, but something she was capable of refusing. She thought about her mother, who had wanted the same thing, and had been stopped before she could build it, and who had trusted in 8 months of careful coded letters that someone would eventually come along who could finish what she started. I wanted peace, she said, when I thought peace meant safety. When I thought the goal was to find a corner of the world where the things that happened to people like Ruth Calloway and the Mason family would not happen to me. She looked at him. Now I know peace means justice, and justice is not a state you arrive at and maintain without effort. It's work. She paused. It's the best work I have ever done. He looked at her for a long moment. That expression, the one she had finally named somewhere in the middle weeks when she'd stopped pretending she hadn't noticed it was fully present and entirely unguarded. Then we keep working, he said. Yes, she said. We do. The legal aid office opened on the 1st of October in a rented room 2 buildings down from the courthouse site where the new construction had already begun. The sign above the door was simple plain letters on plain wood, the kind of sign that said what it meant and meant what it said. Clara had arranged the room. Samuel Pike had arranged the furniture. Thomas Webb returned from Fredericksburg with his testimony on record, and his position in the new records office quietly restored by a commission that needed reliable clerks. More than it needed to punish nervous ones had arranged the filing system. The first client came before the sign was fully dry. She was a woman in her 60s. She had a notice in her hand and a look on her face that Abigail recognized immediately, the look of someone who has been handed something she doesn't understand by people who counted on her not understanding it. Abigail took the notice. She read it. She set it on the table and folded her hands and said in a plain and unhurried voice, "Sit down. I'm going to explain what this says, and then I'm going to explain what your options are, and then you're going to decide what you want to do. All right?" The woman sat down. She had begun this summer as a bride meant to disappear, handed to a stranger by a family that considered her a problem to be disposed of. Walked down an aisle in a borrowed dress that smelled of cedar and dust, expected to vanish into whatever quiet diminishment they had designed for her. She had not vanished. She had read the ledgers and found the pattern. She had carried a deed through a burning building. She had picked up a pistol with hands that did not shake until after. She had sat at 19 kitchen tables and said, "I know what happened to you, and I know you are not alone." She had stood in front of the crowd that Elias Rook assembled and made it into something he never intended it to be. She had finished her mother's work, And now she sat across from a woman in her 60s, with a notice she didn't understand, in a room that smelled of new lumber and fresh ink, in a county that was slowly, imperfectly, and with considerable ongoing effort, learning that the law could be made to serve the people it was supposed to serve. And she was exactly where she intended to be, doing exactly what she intended to do, and no one in the world had the power to make her into anything smaller than that. Abigail Mercer Cross had been sold to a stranger to be forgotten. She had made herself impossible to forget.